It was sitting there on the corner of my dresser, open, hollow, almost mocking me with its stillness. For a few long seconds, I just stared at it, my breath caught in the quiet morning air. The light from the window hit the silk lining inside, and I could see the faint imprint of what used to lie there, my mother's gold bangle, the only piece I had left of her. My fingers trembled when I reached for the box. It was cold, colder than it should have been. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Nothing else in the room looked disturbed. The curtains were still tied back the way I left them. My robe hung neatly on the hook behind the door. The smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen downstairs should have comforted me, but instead it twisted my stomach. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I had moved the bangle and forgotten. Maybe I had worn it last week and left it in my purse. But deep down, I already knew better. Life teaches you to hear the smallest cracks before the whole thing breaks. There's a tone in someone's voice, a shift in routine, a silence that suddenly feels heavier than it should. And for the last few weeks, those small cracks had been appearing around my husband, Daniel. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I closed the velvet box gently, almost tenderly, the way you'd close the eyes of something dying. Then I set it down and made my way downstairs, rehearsing excuses in my mind. Maybe I misplaced it. Maybe the cleaner moved it. Maybe everything is still okay. But when I reached the bottom step and saw Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, head buried in his hands, the coffee untouched in front of him, a cold certainty settled inside me. He looked up when he heard me. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. He tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "Morning," he said, voice thin. I wanted to ask him right there. I wanted to hold up the velvet box and demand an explanation. But something in his expression, a mixture of guilt and desperation, made me pause. So instead, I said, "Morning," back, and walked past him to the fridge, pretending to look for something to eat. My hands shook as I opened the door. The kitchen felt too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. Usually, Daniel would be humming or scrolling on his phone, telling me some ridiculous headline. But that morning, nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, grief started forming a thin outline. Normal life set up. Before things got complicated, before the job loss, before the quiet tension, before the empty velvet box, our life was simple. Not perfect, but comfortable, steady. Daniel and I had been married 12 years, long enough to know each other's habits, but not so long that we'd grown tired of each other. He used to kiss me every morning before leaving for work, sometimes on my forehead, sometimes on my cheek, sometimes on the back of my hand if I was chopping vegetables or folding laundry. It always made me laugh. He worked at a printing company, and though it wasn't glamorous, he took pride in it. He liked routine. He liked being the guy people could count on. And I liked knowing we had that kind of stability. I worked part-time at the public library, sorting returns, recommending books, and helping the older folks print out their church newsletters. It wasn't much money, but I loved it. I loved the smell of old pages, the weight of a book in my hands, the soft hush of people whispering as they walked through the aisles. Things weren't extravagant, but they were warm, predictable. On Sunday mornings, we made pancakes. Daniel always made them too thick. I always added too much vanilla. On Friday nights, we'd lie in bed and watch reruns of old sitcoms, our legs tangled, laughing at jokes we already knew. My jewelry, most of it passed down from my mother, stayed tucked safely in my dresser drawer. I didn't wear the pieces often, but I liked knowing they were there. I liked touching them sometimes when I missed her. Life didn't feel like something extraordinary. It just felt ours. That's why the changes, when they came, felt so jarring. At first, I blamed stress. Daniel had been coming home later and later, claiming he had meetings or unexpected tasks. He was distracted at dinner, picking at his food, stirring his soup until it went cold. Sometimes he wouldn't talk at all, sitting there with his thoughts circling something he didn't want me to see. Then one evening, he came home 2 hours late with no explanation at all. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled. He smelled empty somehow, like someone who'd walked too long in the sun or someone who'd been crying. I put my hand on his arm gently and asked if he was okay. He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Just tired." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the kind of wife who trusted her husband unquestioningly. But the next morning, his manager called. I heard the voicemail while doing the dishes. His voice was calm, polite, but his words made my heart thump in my ears. "Daniel, please return my call. We need to discuss the termination package." I froze. Termination? Daniel had lost his job, and he hadn't told me. When he came home that night, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to see how far the lie went. He walked in with that same tired smile, kissed my top of the head, and asked what was for dinner. "Soup," I answered, keeping my voice steady. He nodded, washed his hands, and sat at the table. For a moment, I watched him. Watched the weight in his shoulders, the way he'd clasped his hands together like he was afraid they might shake. Whatever he was hiding, he was trying so hard to carry it alone. I told myself I'd talk to him the next day, give him one more chance to tell me the truth. But the next day was when I found the velvet box, and the bangle that belonged to my mother, my last tangible connection to her, was gone. I stood there in the kitchen doorway, watching Daniel stare blankly at his cold coffee, and I felt a mixture of fear, love, anger, and heartbreak press against my ribs. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, he whispered something I almost didn't catch. "I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology to me. It sounded like a confession to himself. And that was when the real story began. I didn't confront Daniel that morning. Not yet. Part of me wanted to. The empty velvet box kept flashing in my mind like a warning light. But another part of me, the part that had loved this man for 12 years, wasn't ready to believe he'd do something so careless, so selfish. Instead, I watched him from across the kitchen table. He kept rubbing his forehead with the tips of his fingers, like he was trying to push away a headache or maybe a thought he didn't want to face. The steam rising from the coffee curled in the sunlight, but he didn't touch it. His wedding ring glinted faintly. His shoulders looked smaller somehow. Something was off, and the jewelry, the timing couldn't be a coincidence. When he finally lifted the mug and took a sip, his hand trembled just enough that he nearly spilled it. That's when I knew it wasn't just stress. It was fear. Fear of something he couldn't hide much longer. I let him finish breakfast in silence. Later, as he stepped outside onto the porch to take a call, I followed quietly and listened through the kitchen window because he didn't close the front door all the way. His voice was low, urgent. "No, I don't have it yet," he murmured. "Just give me a few more days, please." A pause. "I said I'll figure it out. Just don't come by the house." My stomach tightened. Who was he talking to? Why didn't they want them near the house? I stepped back quickly before he turned around. When he walked back inside, I was pretending to wipe the counter. He smiled at me, a sad, strained smile. "I'll be out for a bit," he said softly. "Errands." "Okay," I said, holding the dishcloth tighter than I needed to. When he left, I waited until his car was gone from the driveway before I went back upstairs. I checked every drawer, every jewelry pouch, every small box. One by one, I opened them and felt my chest sink. 3 pieces were missing, not just the gold bangle, a pair of sapphire earrings my sister had given me for my birthday, and the thin diamond necklace Daniel gave me our 5th anniversary, the one he'd saved for months to buy. All gone. Every precious thing I owned had been taken quietly, piece by piece, right under my nose. I sat on the edge of the bed with the empty jewelry pouch in my hand. My mother's handwriting was still faintly etched on the tag, her last gift to me before she passed away. I pressed my thumb over the worn letters. A sting of tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. My breathing felt shallow. The room felt smaller. It wasn't the jewelry itself. It was what it meant. He'd gone through my things, without asking, without telling, without explaining. I closed my eyes and tried to steady myself. I needed answers. When Daniel returned later that afternoon, he walked into the house with a forced cheerfulness that felt painful to watch. "Hey," he said lightly, hanging his jacket on the hook, "thought we could order takeout tonight. Maybe Thai?" He talked too fast. His voice had a false brightness to it. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "Did your errands go okay?" Yeah, fine," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just, stuff." Stuff. The casualness in his voice would have fooled anyone else, but after 12 years of marriage, I could hear the cracks. His socks didn't match, the kind of detail he normally never overlooked. His hair was flattened on one side, like he'd been lying down in the car, and his eyes, they carried something heavy. I walked toward him slowly, my hands resting on the kitchen counter behind me. "Daniel," I said softly. He looked up immediately, too quickly, like he expected the question already. "Yeah?" There was a moment, just a moment, where I almost told him I knew, that I had found the empty jewelry boxes, that I had heard the phone call, that I wasn't blind. But I didn't. Something in me needed to hear the lie first, needed to see whether he would say it to my face. So instead, I asked, "How are you really?" His expression flickered. Then the mask slipped back on. "I'm fine," he repeated, "just tired." That's when I knew for certain he wasn't just hiding something. He was drowning in it. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch with the TV playing softly, I checked his jacket, feeling guilty but justified. His wallet was lighter than usual. There was no bank card. He'd taken out all the cash he had, no receipts, no clues. But then I found something in the inside pocket. A small folded slip of paper. A pawn shop ticket. The date was from 3 days ago. The description matched my mother's gold bangle exactly. I stood there in the dim light of the living room, listening to the soft hum of the television and Daniel's uneven breathing. The paper shook in my hands. I pressed my palm over my mouth to keep from gasping. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time slip. He had pawned it. He had pawned my mother's bangle. And he hadn't told me. A chill ran through me as I slowly sank onto the arm of the couch, staring at the man I had loved for more than a decade. His head was tilted back slightly, mouth open, soft snores escaping. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, so unbroken. And yet something between us had cracked beyond repair. I folded the pawn ticket back carefully, the edges softening with the heat of my fingers. I didn't confront him that night either, because now that I knew what he had done, I needed to know why. I needed to understand the whole truth before I decided what to do next. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pawn ticket. I saw my mother's bangle sitting behind a glass counter, handled by strangers who didn't know its story, didn't know the way she used to polish it with her thumb when she was thinking. I imagined Daniel handing it over, probably with shaking hands, probably staring at the floor so he wouldn't see his reflection in the glass. When the sun rose, I was still lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was next to me by then. He must have crept into bed after I finally drifted into a shallow doze. He smelled faintly of coffee and the laundry detergent we'd used for years. Just the scent used to comfort me. This morning, it didn't. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, clutching my own pillow like a lifeline. When he stirred some time later, he let out a soft groan, stretching his arms above his head. I could feel him glance at me, waiting for a morning greeting, but I couldn't bring myself to say good morning when nothing about it felt good. "Morning," he murmured anyway. I nodded, but didn't turn. He exhaled, a deep, heavy exhale, and I heard him stand, his feet shuffling across the hardwood floor. When the bedroom door closed behind him, I finally sat up. Today, I decided I would find out the truth. Daniel was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, standing by the coffee maker. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. There was a hollow around his eyes, the kind that doesn't come from a bad night's sleep, but from carrying a burden too long. He glanced up when he heard me. "Coffee?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "I'm fine." A flicker of something, worry maybe, crossed his face, but he looked away quickly. He poured his own cup, but didn't drink it, just held it in both hands, staring into the dark liquid like it might tell him how to fix his life. I watched him, really watched him, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched around the mug, the slump in his posture. This wasn't a man who had simply made a small mistake. This was a man who had been breaking silently for months. And even so, he had stolen from me. He had taken something precious. He had gone through my things like a stranger in my own home. I waited until he sat at the table. Then I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady but soft, "we need to talk." He froze. A full, aching second passed before he lifted his eyes to mine. "About what?" he asked, though the tremor in his voice told me he already knew. I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out the pawn ticket. His face went pale. Color drained from his cheeks so fast I felt a pang of guilt in my stomach, even though I was the one who'd been wronged. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. So I placed the ticket on the table between us. He stared at it like it was a piece of burning coal. "Where did you—" His voice cracked. "In your jacket." "Daniel, why did you pawn my jewelry?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Silence wrapped around us like a second skin. Only the ticking of the kitchen clock filled the space. Finally, he sank back into his chair, covering his face with both hands. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he whispered. The words stung, like he'd been planning to tell me, just not yet. Not when I still had the chance to get my jewelry back, not when it could have been undone. I swallowed hard. "Daniel, then how were you planning to tell me?" He let his hands fall to the table, his fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't," he admitted. The honesty should have felt relieving. Instead, it felt like a slap. I leaned back slowly, heat rising behind my eyes. "Daniel, that bangle was my mother's. You know that." "I know." His voice broke. "God, I know. I hated doing it. I hated myself for it. Then why do it?" He looked down at his hands as though the answer might be written there. He ran his thumb along the edge of the pawn ticket, tracing it gently like it might cut him. I lost my job months ago, he said quietly. My breath caught. Months? Yes, he whispered. 3 months ago. 3? I felt the room tilt slightly. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. We could have... I was ashamed. His voice was small, almost childish. I didn't want you to see me differently, he added. You've always looked at me like I'm steady, reliable, strong. I didn't want to lose that. My chest tightened. 12 years of marriage, and still he thought he had to be perfect for me. But pawning my jewelry? I asked softly, gripping the chair. You went into our bedroom. You opened my drawers. You took something you knew was precious. I didn't have a choice, he blurted. We were behind on bills. Credit cards were maxed out. I tried to find work, anything. I applied everywhere. Grocery stores, gas stations, warehouses. Nobody called back. And then he stopped, swallowing hard. And then what? He squeezed his eyes shut. Someone I owed money to threatened to come to the house. My blood went cold. Owed money to? I asked quietly. Daniel, what kind of money? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. Not the details, but the scale, the depth, the danger. Just some debts, he said eventually. I thought I could pay them off once I found another job, but then interest kept piling up and... Daniel, I interrupted, look at me. He lifted his eyes slowly. Did you gamble? Silence. Painful, crushing silence. His lips pressed together, his jaw twitched, and then he nodded once, barely noticeable, but enough. My hand flew to my mouth. Gambling. It wasn't just debt, it was a spiral, a hole he kept digging deeper. How long? I whispered. A few months. I thought I could win back the money I lost. I thought I could fix it before you knew. Fix it? Men always think they can fix things quietly, even when silence is the thing breaking us. And the jewelry? My voice was almost gone. He looked down. I needed cash fast. I was going to get it back, I swear. I closed my eyes. The image of my mother's bangle flashed again. The weight of it, the history of it, gone because the man I trusted most couldn't trust me back. I felt something inside me shift, not break, just shift. Realization, maybe, or the beginning of heartbreak. I opened my eyes, my voice barely a whisper. Daniel, you should have told me. Tears welled in his eyes. I know. And now, how much more haven't you told me? He looked away, and the silence, again, was its own answer. I don't remember walking back into the house. I only remember the way the door clicked shut behind me, softer than usual, like even it knew I was too fragile to handle any more noise. I set my keys on the counter mechanically, my hands trembling. My breath came in uneven pulls, like the air in the room had grown thick and heavy. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, elbows dug into the wood, his fingers running through his hair. He looked up when I entered, eyes red, face pale, guilt written so plainly across him it nearly knocked the wind out of me again. He opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand. Don't, I whispered. My voice didn't sound like it belonged to me. Too thin, too hollow. He swallowed. May, please, I said, still holding that hand up like a shield. Just let me sit first. I took the chair opposite him, the one I usually used when we had breakfast together, The one where he'd touched my knee under the table while teasing me about burning toast. Now it felt miles away, like it belonged to another marriage entirely. "Mark," I finally said, staring at the wood grain between us. "I saw the pawn slip." He closed his eyes. Of all the things he could have done, that silently confirmed it. That hurt the most, because it meant he didn't even have the strength to deny it. He had already surrendered the truth. My throat tightened. "You sold my jewelry," I said softly. "My mother's jewelry, without telling me." He didn't answer, just breathed out, shaky and long, like someone finally loosening a tight knot around their chest. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do that to me?" He lowered his hands to the table, flattening his palms like he needed something steady to hold on to. "May, I didn't know what else to do." I flinched, not from his words, from the helplessness in them. "You could have talked to me," I whispered. "I know," he said quickly, desperately. "I know that now, but at the time, everything was happening so fast." He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time, and I hated it, because in his eyes I saw exactly what he wanted me to see: regret, shame, fear. And I had loved that man for 12 years, loved him so deeply that even now, that regret made something inside me soften against my will. "Losing the job," he said, his voice low. "I thought I could fix it before it got this bad. I kept thinking, just one more week, just one more interview, one more chance." "And when the chance didn't come," I murmured, "you took something from me instead." He winced. "May, no, I thought I'd replace it. I thought once I got a new job, I'd buy it all back before you ever had to know." A hot tear slid down my cheek. I didn't wipe it. "That necklace," I said, voice trembling, "was the last gift my mother gave me before she died. The earrings were from my grandma. I told you what they meant to me." "I remember," he whispered. "And you still sold them?" He bowed his head like the weight of that truth was too heavy. "I still sold them." I pressed a hand to my mouth, choking on a sound I didn't want him to hear, that little whimper that escapes when pain finally breaches the surface. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A clock somewhere ticked too loudly. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then Mark reached out, fingers trembling, like he wanted to take my hand. I pulled mine back. He froze. His face crumpled slightly, but he didn't try again. "May, I'm so sorry." "I'm not sure you understand what you broke," I whispered. He looked at me confused but desperate to understand. "This is about trust," I said, "about the one thing I believed we had always been safe in. You and me, we were a team, and you made a choice to act alone, a choice to betray something sacred between us." Mark's shoulders slumped like each word was pushing him further down. "I wasn't thinking straight," he said weakly. "That's exactly what scares me, because even in panic, you know me. You know I would have helped you. You know I would have stood by you." He covered his face with both hands, his breath hitched. It was the first time I'd seen him cry in years, and it should have moved me. It should have made me soften or reach for him. But all I felt was the hollow ache of someone mourning something they couldn't put back together. After a moment, he dropped his hands, wiping his face roughly. "He'll get it all back," he said. "I'll go talk to them first thing in the morning. I'll work 2 jobs if I have to. May, I swear I'm going to fix this." I shook my head slowly. "Fixing the jewelry isn't the hard part, Mark." He looked at me like a man hanging on to his last thread of hope. "How do I fix us?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because in that moment, I honestly wasn't sure there was an answer. Instead, I stood. My legs felt unsteady, like they had forgotten how to hold me after everything. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight," I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Mark stood too, panic flashing across his face. "May!" "I need space," I said. "I need to think." "But we can talk." "We did talk," I said gently, painfully. "Now I need to breathe." He stopped then, just stood there watching me, the kind of look a man gives when he finally realizes he's crossed a line he can't step over back. I turned away before I broke again. As I reached the hallway, Mark's voice came, soft and trembling. "May, I never meant to hurt you." I didn't turn around, but my voice found its way back to him. "I know," I said, "but you did." The guest room was cold when I closed the door behind me, colder still when I curled under the sheets and curled into myself, and for the first time in our marriage, I cried alone. I woke before the sun the next morning, not from an alarm, not from any noise, but from the heaviness sitting on my chest. That kind of weight that presses the breath out of you before your feet ever touch the floor. The guest room was dim, the blinds still drawn, and the air felt colder than the night before, as if grief itself had chilled the walls. For a few minutes, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, hands folded on my stomach, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, a pipe clicking, a soft hum from the heater. And then something I hadn't expected, the quiet shuffle of Mark moving around the kitchen. I could smell coffee, but it wasn't the warm, comforting smell it used to be. It only made my stomach tighten. I slipped out of bed, wrapped my robe tight, and opened the guest room door just enough to look down the hall. Mark was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He was still in last night's clothes, the same wrinkled shirt, the same hollow look carved into his shoulders. He turned at the sound of the door and paused. "Morning," he said quietly. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet, didn't trust it wouldn't crack or tremble. He lifted 1 mug slightly. "I made yours the way you like." I hesitated before answering. "Thank you," I said finally, though I stayed rooted where I was. He set the mug down, untouched. "May, I know today's going to be hard, but I want to try to make things right." I took a slow breath. "Tell me what you're planning to do." He wiped a hand over his face, the exhaustion visible in every movement, but he straightened a little, as if bracing himself. "I'm going to the pawn shop as soon as they open. I'm going to talk to the owner, explain everything, ask if there's any chance—" "They're going to ask for money," I said gently. "I know, and I'll pay whatever I can. I'll take something to sell, or—" I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "Mark, I don't want you selling more things to fix this." His shoulders dropped. "Well, then I don't know, I'll figure something out. I have to." The sincerity in his voice stirred something inside me. Not forgiveness, not hope, something softer, quieter. A reminder that even when someone hurts you, the memory of who they were doesn't disappear overnight. I walked slowly into the kitchen, standing across from him. "We'll go together." He looked surprised, like that was the last thing he expected to hear. You want to come?" "I need to see it for myself. I need to know what happened to the things that belonged to my family." He swallowed hard. "Okay, if that's what you want." "It is." We drove in silence. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The sky was that pale, washed-out blue that always made me feel suspended between yesterday and today. The car felt different, the same dashboard, the same old pine-scented air freshener swinging from the mirror, but the space between us had stretched into something I didn't know how to step across. When we pulled into the pawn shop's lot, I stared at the building for a long moment before opening the door. The sign buzzed faintly with a dying neon flicker, and the windows were smudged with fingerprints. It looked exactly like the kind of place where hope came in broken and left with something missing. Inside, the air smelled of dust and metal. A radio played an old blues song from somewhere behind the counter. The man from the day before wasn't out front, but another person, a woman with a tired face and dyed red hair, stood at the register. She looked at us with the kind of eyes that had seen too many people walk in defeated. "How can I help you?" she asked. Mark cleared his throat. "Yesterday, I made a mistake. I need to buy some jewelry back." Her expression didn't change. "What was the item?" He looked at me, asking permission without saying a word. "My mother's gold locket, engraved with the initials AM and the date 1984, and a pair of antique pearl earrings. They were in a blue velvet box." She typed something slowly. "Do you have the ticket?" Mark slid it across the counter, his hand shaking slightly. She read it, nodded, typed again. Then her face shifted, not softening, but sinking. "They're still here," she said finally. A breath escaped my chest, shaky, unsteady, but real. "But," she added, "the price to redeem them is the loan amount plus interest." "How much?" I asked. She turned the screen slightly. The number felt like a punch. Mark let out a soft, almost whispered, "Oh, God." He looked at me, his face crumbling. "I'm so sorry." I swallowed. The number wasn't impossible, but it wasn't small either, not something you could pull from thin air. The woman watched us both with a kind of weary understanding. "If you need time, we can hold the items for 6 more days before they go to sale." 6 days. 6 days to decide whether the pieces my mother left me, the ones she wore at her wedding, the ones she promised would be mine, would disappear into someone else's hands forever. Mark leaned closer. "May, I'll work something out. I swear I will. "No," I said quietly. "I'll handle it." He blinked, stunned. "May, please, let me—" "I need to fix this part myself," I said gently but firmly. "These pieces were entrusted to me. If getting them back is the first step towards healing, then I need to be the one to take it." He nodded slowly, defeated. I turned to the woman. "I'll come back with the money. Please don't sell them." She gave me a tired smile. "I won't." We walked out in silence. The morning was brighter now, but it didn't warm me. My thoughts felt heavy, tangled, raw. Mark opened the car door for me, a small old habit, then hesitated, his hand on the frame. "May, what happens now?" I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man I married, at the man who hurt me, at the man who was trying, in his own broken way, to make things right. "I don't know," I said softly, "but I think we start by telling the truth about everything." He nodded, and for the first time in days, something in his expression shifted. Not hope, exactly, but humility, the kind that comes before growth. As we drove home, a quiet certainty settled over me. It was time to take back control of my life, piece by piece, even if it meant facing things I'd been too afraid to look at before. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the sun had fully risen. The light fell across the house in that soft, forgiving way early morning light tends to do, like it hadn't heard the arguments, the confessions, the breaking of trust that happened inside those walls. But I felt none of that softness. Not yet. I stepped out of the car, feeling the cool gravel under my shoes. Mark walked beside me, but a little slower, giving me space without saying it. The house felt unfamiliar. The same porch, the same door, the same potted plant I kept forgetting to water, but I wasn't walking back into the same marriage. Inside, I went straight to the kitchen. I didn't realize my hands were trembling until I reached for a glass of water and had to grip the counter to steady myself. I'll give you some time," Mark said quietly from the doorway. He sounded hesitant, almost afraid to step closer. But before he could leave, there was a knock at the front door. A sharp, quick knock, the kind people use when they're not here socially. Mark stiffened. I felt my stomach sink. The knock came again. He exhaled shakily. That's probably them. I turned to look at him fully. The loan people? He nodded. They've been stopping by since I missed the payment. My heart clenched. Mark, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want them showing up while you were home, he said, shame clouding every word. I never thought they'd come this early. The knock came again, louder this time. I walked to the front window and peeked through the curtain. 2 men stood on the porch, not dressed violently, not looking dangerous, but tired, impatient, the kind of tired you only get from dealing with people in trouble. Should I open it? I asked quietly. He hesitated. I'll talk to them. I placed a hand gently on his arm. No, we talk to them. He looked at me, surprised, but relieved. When I opened the door, both men turned toward us. The taller one spoke first. Mark Willis? Yes, his voice wavered slightly. This is my wife, May. I nodded politely, keeping my voice steady. Good morning. What can we help you with? They exchanged a look, not intimidating, but assessing. We've been trying to reach you, the shorter man said, regarding an outstanding personal loan. Mark's shoulders sagged. I know. Payments are overdue, the taller one added gently. We need to discuss next steps. I stepped forward. I'm aware something happened, but I wasn't informed until yesterday. Both men softened almost imperceptibly, the way people do when they realize the spouse isn't part of the mess. How much does he owe? I asked. The taller man pulled out a small pad. Balance is just under 4,000. I felt the number hit me in the chest, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented, how far things had gone before he came to me. Mark rubbed his forehead. I'm sorry, I'm trying to work out a way to... Sir, the shorter man said, we understand people hit tough times, but ignoring calls only makes it harder. I know, he whispered. There was something humbling, painful but necessary about watching Mark stand there, facing his mistakes in front of strangers. No defensiveness, just quiet acknowledgement. I stepped in again. What happens if we make a partial payment today? They both looked at me, surprised I was taking the lead. A partial payment shows good faith. That would prevent escalation. I nodded. We can do that. Mark turned to me quickly. May, you don't need to... I'm not paying it for you, I said softly but firmly. I'm paying it because we're going to rebuild honesty in this house, and that starts with facing things head on instead of hiding them. He stared at me for a long moment. His eyes glistened, not with relief, but with something deeper, a kind of gratitude that came wrapped in regret. I'll pay half today to the men, and the rest next week. You have my word. They wrote something down, nodding. Thank you, man. That'll keep things from moving to collections. We appreciate your cooperation. Mark cleared his throat. I appreciate it too. When they left, Mark shut the door gently and leaned his forehead against it, exhaling shakily. I'm so embarrassed. I never wanted you to see any of that. I stood behind him, hands folded, my own emotions tangled in too many directions to name. Mark, embarrassment isn't the problem. He turned slightly, looking at me over his shoulder. The problem, I continued, is that you were ready to lose everything, your pride, your peace, my jewelry, our trust, before you were ready to come to me. That's what hurts. He closed his eyes. You're right, and I'll regret that for a long time. We stood there in silence for a moment, not tense, not hostile, just quiet, real. I finally spoke. I need you to call your sister. He blinked. Why? Because she asked me last week if everything was okay between us. I told her we were fine.
I lied for you, and I don't want to lie anymore. To her, to myself, or to anyone else. His voice cracked. May, she'll tell the whole family. They'll think I'm a failure. No, I said softly. They'll think you're human, and maybe you'll get support instead of sinking alone. He swallowed hard. And Mark, I'm going to tell my sister too. I need someone to talk to. I've held this in long enough. For the first time since the night I discovered the missing jewelry, Mark didn't argue, didn't push back, didn't try to control the narrative. He simply nodded. Okay, he whispered. Tell whoever you need to. And that moment, that tiny, humble surrender felt like the first true consequence he was ready to face. Not the debt, not the pawn shop, not the shame, but letting the truth be seen, even when it wasn't flattering, even when it wasn't easy, even when it meant admitting how deeply he'd faltered. As I watched him sit heavily on the couch, hands covering his face, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't the end of us, but it wasn't the beginning either. It was the reckoning, the part where the truth stops whispering and starts speaking out loud.
I didn't expect healing to come softly. I thought it would arrive like a bright sunrise, warming everything at once. But instead, it came in slow, delicate threads, one conversation at a time, one small act of honesty after another, almost like mending a torn cloth with stitches only the heart can feel. The morning after everything came out, the pawn tickets, the debt, the confession, our home felt different, quieter, but not empty. More like something had shifted in the air, and we both knew we couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. I woke early and made tea, the way my mother used to, chamomile with a touch of honey. I sat at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around the warm mug, staring at the sunlight cutting across the tile. I didn't hear Mark walk in, but I felt him. Slow steps, careful breathing, like he was afraid to disturb the fragile peace. He sat across from me, eyes tired but softer than they'd been in weeks. I canceled the overdraft, he said quietly, and I called about the credit card. I'm setting up a payment plan. I nodded, not with approval, not with resentment, just with acknowledgement. He reached into his pocket and slid something across the table, a small crumpled envelope. This is the receipt from the pawn shop for the necklace we got back. I want you to keep it. Transparency. Everything I do from now on, you'll know. No secrets, no pride getting in the way. The envelope felt strange in my hands, light but heavy with meaning. You don't have to prove anything to me, I said softly. He looked up, eyes wet. Yes, I do. I broke something. I sighed, not out of frustration, but out of understanding. We'll rebuild it together, but slowly. He nodded, and it was the first time in weeks that his shoulders dropped, his breath steadied, and he looked like the man I had loved for years, not the man cornered by fear. Healing didn't come with dramatic gestures. It came with everyday choices. He took on small jobs to get us stabilized, repair work for neighbors, a short-term contract fixing HVAC units, even delivering groceries in the evenings. He came home tired, clothes dirty, but his spirit cleaner than before. I found myself watching him more closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. The way he'd pause before speaking, how he made sure bills were left on the counter for us to look at together, how he'd ask, quietly, "Are you okay today?" Not out of guilt, but out of care. And I changed too. I started journaling again, something I hadn't since my mother passed. I wrote about my anger, my sadness, the hurt that still pulsed beneath the surface. I also wrote about the things I was grateful for, the way he held himself accountable, the honesty we were building, the small pockets of peace returning to our home. One afternoon, as I sat at the dining table writing, Mark approached with a small box. Not velvet, not fancy, just a simple cardboard box tied with twine. "What's this?" I asked. He lowered his eyes, almost shy. "A promise." I opened it. Inside was a jewelry tray he'd handmade from reclaimed wood, polished, warm, with little compartments lined in soft blue felt. "I know I can't undo what I did, and I can't bring back the exact pieces that were lost, but I want you to have something safe, something that speaks to the care I should have shown before." My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from the gentleness of the moment. "It's beautiful," I whispered. His eyes softened. "So are you." I didn't cry. Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his, and in that simple gesture, I felt something ease inside me, the understanding that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing to move forward with eyes open and heart guarded but willing. As weeks turned to months, our home felt warmer again, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. We had hard days, nights when trust felt fragile, mornings when old memories stung, but we talked, really talked, and slowly the cracks filled with something stronger than before. One Sunday evening, after dinner, I walked into our bedroom and lingered by the dresser. The new jewelry tray sat on top, catching the soft lamplight. Inside were the few heirlooms we'd recovered, along with a couple new pieces I'd bought for myself. Nothing expensive, just symbolic. I touched the necklace we retrieved from the pawn shop. It no longer carried the same sting. Now it held a story, one of loss, yes, but also of survival. When I walked back into the living room, Mark was sitting on the couch, scrolling through job listings. "How's the search?" I asked. He looked up and smiled, small but real. "Better. I have 2 interviews next week." "That's good," I said. He hesitated. "And thank you for staying, for trying." I sat beside him, leaning gently against his shoulder. "We're both trying. That's the part that matters." He nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the quiet, steady sound of our breathing sinking again. Life doesn't always give us neat endings. Some stories end in separation, others in reconciliation. Ours? It is still unfolding, but we learned something vital. Marriage isn't a shelter from hardship, it's a shelter through it. My mother used to say, "Forgiveness is the quiet room where love rests when it's tired." I understand that now. We didn't erase what happened. We honored it. We learned from it, and we let it guide us into a gentler chapter. Today, when I open that jewelry tray, I don't think of loss anymore. I think of repair, of what 2 imperfect people can build when they choose transparency over silence, honesty over pride, and healing over hurt.